Robert Matthews had everything money could buy, but none of it could fill the empty space in his heart. His wife Sarah had died 3 years ago from cancer, leaving him alone in their massive estate on the hills of Connecticut. At 62, Robert was still handsome with silver hair and kind blue eyes, but grief had changed him. He threw himself into his business empire, traveling constantly to avoid the memories that haunted every corner of his home. The house had been Sarah's pride and joy. She had spent years decorating each room with care, choosing every piece of furniture and artwork. Now it felt like a museum of their past life together. Robert could barely stand to be there, so he stayed busy with his chain of luxury hotels across the country. His assistant handled most things at home, including the household staff. 3 months ago, Robert had hired a new housekeeper through an agency. Her name was Grace Williams, a 45-year-old woman who had recently moved to Connecticut from Georgia. The agency said she had excellent references and years of experience caring for large homes. Robert had met her briefly before leaving for his latest business trip to California. She seemed quiet and professional, which was exactly what he wanted. He didn't need someone trying to fill Sarah's place or make conversation about his personal life. Grace was different from the previous housekeepers who had worked for Robert. Most of them had been older white women who treated the job like any other cleaning position. They did their work and left, never really caring about the house or the man who lived there alone. Grace was different, though Robert didn't realize it yet. She was a single mother who had raised 3 children on her own after her husband left when she was young. She understood loss and loneliness, even though she had never lived with such wealth. When Grace first walked through the Matthews estate, she was amazed by its beauty. The house had 12 bedrooms, a library with floor-to-ceiling books, a grand piano in the living room, and windows that looked out over perfectly maintained gardens. But she also noticed something else. Despite all the luxury, the house felt sad and empty. There were family photos everywhere, but they were covered in dust. The beautiful furniture was barely used. It was clear that Mr. Matthews was running from something. Robert's business trip to California was supposed to last 2 weeks. He was opening a new hotel in San Francisco and needed to oversee every detail. The hotel business had been his life's work, something he had built from nothing into an empire worth hundreds of millions. He was known for his attention to detail and his fair treatment of employees. But lately, even work couldn't distract him from his grief. On the plane to California, Robert stared out the window and thought about Sarah. They had met when they were both young and poor, working at a small hotel in New York City. She was a secretary, and he was learning the business from the ground up. They fell in love over shared dreams of someday owning their own place. It took them 30 years to build their fortune, and they had planned to enjoy it together in their golden years. Cancer had stolen those plans away. The new hotel project in San Francisco was challenging. There were problems with permits, issues with contractors, and a dozen small crises that needed Robert's personal attention. He threw himself into the work, staying at the construction site from dawn until late at night. His assistant called several times to update him on things at home, but Robert barely listened. He trusted Grace to do her job, and he didn't want to think about the empty house waiting for him. Meanwhile, back in Connecticut, Grace was discovering more about the man she worked for. She found old letters that Sarah had written, family albums tucked away in closets, and evidence of a love story that had lasted decades. Grace had cleaned many houses in her life, but she had never seen such clear signs of deep love and devastating loss. Her heart went out to the man who couldn't bear to be in his own home. Grace began to understand that this wasn't just a job. This was a man who needed help healing, even if he didn't know it yet. She started to form a plan, something that would either help Robert find peace or get her fired. She knew she was taking a big risk, but something told her it was the right thing to do. As she worked in the quiet house, Grace began to prepare for Robert's return, hoping that what she was planning would bring light back into his world. Grace spent her first week in the Matthews house learning its rhythms and secrets. She discovered that Mr. Matthews had locked away most of his wife's personal belongings in the master bedroom, but traces of Sarah were everywhere else. There were her gardening gloves still sitting by the back door, her favorite coffee mug unwashed in the kitchen cabinet, and her reading glasses on the nightstand next to a book she would never finish. The house told the story of a man who had stopped living when his wife died. The refrigerator contained only basic items that wouldn't spoil. The living room furniture was covered with sheets to protect it from dust. The beautiful grand piano that Sarah used to play sat silent, its bench pushed neatly underneath. Grace could see that Robert was preserving everything exactly as it was when Sarah was alive, but he couldn't bear to actually live with those memories. Grace had her own experience with loss. Her husband Marcus had walked out on her and their 3 children 15 years ago, leaving her to work multiple jobs just to keep food on the table. She had cleaned houses, worked in restaurants, and taken care of other people's children while raising her own. Her kids were grown now with families of their own, but those hard years had taught her about surviving grief and moving forward when everything seemed impossible. As Grace cleaned and organized, she began to form a picture of who Sarah Matthews had been. From the photos and personal items scattered throughout the house, Grace could see that Sarah was a woman who loved life. There were pictures of her gardening, cooking for large dinner parties, playing piano for friends, and traveling to exotic places with Robert. Sarah had been the heart of this house, and when she died, the heart stopped beating. Grace found Sarah's personal journal in a drawer in the kitchen. She knew she shouldn't read it, but something made her open it to a random page. Sarah had written about how worried she was about Robert, how she feared he would shut down completely if anything happened to her. Robert loves so deeply, Sarah had written, but that same love makes him vulnerable to drowning in grief. I hope someone will help him remember that love isn't supposed to end with death. It's supposed to continue by sharing it with others. Those words hit Grace like a lightning bolt. She realized that she wasn't just here to clean house. Maybe she was here for a bigger purpose. Grace had always believed that God put people in each other's lives for reasons that weren't always clear at first. Perhaps she was meant to help this broken man find his way back to living. Grace began to make small changes around the house. She opened the curtains that had been closed for months, letting sunlight stream into the dark rooms. She removed the dust covers from the furniture and polished everything until it gleamed. She bought fresh flowers for the vases that had sat empty since Sarah's death. Most importantly, she began cooking meals and leaving them in the refrigerator with notes. Even though Robert wasn't there to eat them, the gardener, an elderly man named Miguel who had worked for the Matthews family for 20 years, noticed the changes immediately. "The house feels different," he told Grace one afternoon. "It feels alive again. Mrs. Sarah would be happy to see someone caring for it properly." Miguel told Grace stories about the couple, how they used to host big parties and fill the house with friends and laughter. He showed her Sarah's favorite spots in the garden and explained how she had planned each flower bed. Grace spent hours in Sarah's garden, learning about the plants and flowers that had brought the woman such joy. She found Sarah's gardening journal with detailed notes about when to plant, when to prune, and how to care for each type of flower. Grace had always loved gardening, but she had never had space for more than a small vegetable patch behind her rental house. Working in Sarah's elaborate gardens felt like stepping into a beautiful dream. As the days passed, Grace felt more connected to the house and to the memory of the woman who had loved it so much. She began to understand what Sarah would want for her husband. Sarah wouldn't want Robert to preserve everything like a shrine to the dead. She would want him to live again, to find joy again, to honor their love by continuing to love. Grace knew that Robert would be returning soon from his business trip. She also knew that what she was planning would either help him heal or cost her the job she desperately needed. But Grace had learned long ago that doing the right thing often required taking risks. She had one more week to finish her preparations for Robert's homecoming, and she intended to use every moment wisely. The house was beginning to feel like a home again, filled with warmth and care instead of just memories and dust. Grace hoped that when Robert walked through his front door, he would feel the difference and understand that healing was possible, even after the deepest loss. Grace's most ambitious plan began to take shape during her second week in the Matthews house. She had been thinking about Robert's upcoming birthday, which she discovered was in just 10 days. Sarah's calendar, still hanging in the kitchen, had the date circled in red with little hearts drawn around it. Grace could imagine how Sarah used to celebrate her husband's special day with love and attention to every detail. Grace decided that Robert needed to remember what it felt like to be celebrated and cared for. She knew it was risky, but she believed that Sarah would want someone to make sure Robert's birthday wasn't just another day of loneliness and grief. Grace began planning a surprise that would either touch Robert's heart or get her immediately fired. First, Grace contacted Miguel the gardener and asked him to help her with Sarah's rose garden. Sarah had planted dozens of different varieties of roses, and according to her garden journal, they would be blooming perfectly right around Robert's birthday. Miguel showed Grace how to cut the roses properly and explained which ones were Sarah's favorites. She always said the yellow roses were for friendship, the red ones for passionate love, and the pink ones for gentle love that lasts forever, Miguel explained with tears in his eyes. Grace spent hours learning to arrange flowers the way Sarah used to do. She found Sarah's collection of crystal vases and her flower arranging tools. There were photos of beautiful arrangements Sarah had created for parties and special occasions. Grace practiced until she could create arrangements that honored Sarah's style, while adding her own touch of warmth. Next, Grace discovered Sarah's recipe collection. Sarah had been an amazing cook who loved to entertain. Her recipes were written on index cards in beautiful handwriting, with little notes about when she had served each dish and how much Robert had enjoyed it. Grace found the menu for Robert's birthday dinner from the year before Sarah died. She had made his favorites: herb-crusted lamb, roasted vegetables from her garden, and a chocolate cake that took 2 days to prepare properly. Grace knew she was taking a huge chance, but she decided to recreate that exact menu for Robert's birthday. She had never cooked such elaborate food before, but she was determined to learn. She practiced each recipe during the week, adjusting the quantities to cook for one person instead of the large parties Sarah used to host. Grace wanted everything to be perfect, not because she was trying to replace Sarah, but because she wanted Robert to feel loved and remembered on his special day. The biggest risk Grace took was in the living room with Sarah's piano. Grace had played piano as a child in her church, but she hadn't touched the keys in years. She found Sarah's sheet music collection and discovered that Sarah had been learning to play The Way You Look Tonight, which was apparently the song that played at Robert and Sarah's wedding. Grace knew that if she could learn to play this song, it might help Robert remember the joy in his marriage instead of just the pain of losing it. Grace practiced the piano every afternoon when the house was quiet. Her fingers were rusty at first, but muscle memory slowly returned. She worked on the song piece by piece, determined to play it beautifully for Robert's birthday. She imagined Sarah's spirit guiding her hands on the keys, helping her bring music back into the silent house. As Grace prepared for the surprise, she learned more about Robert from the people who knew him. The mailman told her that Robert used to be friendly and talkative, always asking about people's families and remembering personal details. The grocery delivery boy mentioned that Robert used to tip generously and always had a kind word for everyone. These stories painted a picture of a man who had once been warm and engaged with the world around him. Grace realized that grief hadn't just taken away Robert's wife. It had taken away his connection to other people and to life itself. She began to understand that her mission wasn't just about making Robert's birthday special. It was about reminding him that he was still alive, and that there were still people who cared about his well-being. 3 days before Robert was scheduled to return from California, Grace put the finishing touches on her surprise. She had cleaned every inch of the house until it sparkled. She had planted new flowers in the garden beds that had been neglected since Sarah's death. She had practiced the piano piece until she could play it with feeling and grace. Most importantly, she had filled the house with the kind of love and care that Sarah would have wanted Robert to feel. Grace knew that when Robert walked through his front door, he would either be touched by her efforts to honor his wife's memory, or he would be angry that she had presumed to interfere in his private grief. Either way, Grace was ready to face the consequences of following her heart. Robert's business trip to California had been more draining than usual. The new hotel project faced unexpected problems, and Robert found himself working 18-hour days trying to solve them. His assistant Jennifer had been calling regularly with updates from home, but Robert barely listened to her reports. He assumed everything was running smoothly under the new housekeeper's care, and he didn't want to think about returning to his empty house. On the flight back to Connecticut, Robert felt the familiar dread settling over him. He knew that walking into his house would bring back all the memories he had been trying to escape. The silence would remind him of Sarah's absence. The untouched rooms would show him how little he was actually living instead of just existing. Part of him wanted to book another business trip immediately, but he knew he couldn't run forever. Robert's flight landed at Bradley International Airport on a rainy Thursday evening. His driver was waiting with the usual quiet efficiency, and they made the hour-long drive to Robert's estate in comfortable silence. As they pulled up the winding driveway, Robert noticed that lights were on throughout the house. This was unusual, since he typically left most rooms dark when he traveled. He assumed Grace was working late to finish cleaning before his return. When Robert opened his front door, he stopped in complete shock. The house didn't feel like the same place he had left 3 weeks ago. Instead of the cold museum-like atmosphere he was used to, the house felt warm and alive. Fresh flowers filled every vase, their sweet scent mixing with the smell of something delicious cooking in the kitchen. Soft lighting created a welcoming glow throughout the rooms, and he could hear gentle music playing somewhere in the distance. Robert set down his luggage and walked slowly through his transformed home. The dust covers had been removed from all the furniture, and everything gleamed with careful attention. The window sparkled, letting in the last light of the evening. Most surprising of all, nothing had been moved or changed from where Sarah had arranged it. Instead, everything looked exactly as it had when Sarah was alive and caring for their home. As Robert moved through the house, he began to notice small touches that made his heart skip. There were fresh towels in his bathroom, folded exactly the way Sarah used to fold them. His favorite coffee mug was sitting clean and ready by the coffee maker. The morning newspaper was folded neatly on his reading chair, with his reading glasses placed precisely where he liked them. Someone had been paying very close attention to his habits and preferences. The biggest shock came when Robert reached the kitchen. The room was filled with the most incredible smells, and he could see that an elaborate meal was being prepared. Pots simmered on the stove, something wonderful was baking in the oven, and a beautiful birthday cake sat cooling on the counter. Robert suddenly remembered that his birthday was tomorrow, something he had completely forgotten in his grief and busy work schedule. Grace emerged from the pantry carrying herbs from Sarah's garden. When she saw Robert standing in the doorway, her face lit up with a warm smile. "Welcome home, Mr. Matthews," she said softly. "I hope you don't mind, but I wanted to make sure everything was ready for your birthday tomorrow. I found Mrs. Sarah's menu from your last birthday celebration together, and I thought you might like to have those same dishes again." Robert was speechless. No one had remembered his birthday since Sarah died. His assistant Jennifer usually sent a card, and his brother might call, but no one had ever gone to this kind of trouble for him. He could see that Grace had spent considerable time and effort recreating Sarah's elaborate birthday dinner. The attention to detail was overwhelming and deeply moving. "You didn't have to do this," Robert finally managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. "This is far beyond what I hired you to do." Grace wiped her hands on her apron and looked at Robert with gentle understanding. "Mr. Matthews, I've been taking care of people my whole life, and I've learned that sometimes we need someone to remind us that we matter. Tomorrow is your birthday, and that's worth celebrating, even if it feels different now than it used to." Robert felt tears threatening to spill over. He hadn't cried since Sarah's funeral, but something about Grace's kindness was breaking through the walls he had built around his heart. The house felt alive again for the first time in 3 years, and he wasn't sure how to handle the emotions that were flooding through him. Grace seemed to understand his struggle.
"Why don't you go freshen up from your trip?" she suggested gently.
"Dinner will be ready in about an hour, and I have a few more surprises that I think you'll enjoy." Mrs. Sarah left very detailed notes about how she liked to celebrate your special day. As Robert headed upstairs to his bedroom, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since Sarah's death, he was actually looking forward to being in his own home. Grace had somehow brought warmth and life back to the place that had become a cold monument to his grief. He didn't know what other surprises she had planned, but he was beginning to realize that this remarkable woman might just be exactly what he needed to find his way back to living. When Robert came downstairs an hour later, he was amazed to find that Grace had transformed his dining room into something magical. The formal table was set for one, but it didn't feel lonely. Instead, it felt intimate and special. Sarah's best china gleamed in the soft candlelight, and a stunning arrangement of roses from Sarah's garden served as the centerpiece. The yellow, red, and pink blooms seemed to glow with warmth and love. Grace had prepared every dish exactly as Sarah used to make it. The herb-crusted lamb was perfectly cooked, tender, and flavorful. The roasted vegetables from Sarah's garden still carried the taste of sunshine and earth. Even the dinner rolls were baked to the same golden perfection that Robert remembered from happier times. As he ate, Robert felt like Sarah's love was somehow still present in every bite. "This is incredible, Grace," Robert said as he savored the familiar flavors. How did you learn to cook like this? These recipes aren't easy to master. Grace smiled as she served him another helping of vegetables. I've been cooking since I was 12 years old when my mama got sick and I had to take care of my younger brothers and sisters. But I'll admit, Mrs. Sarah's recipes were a challenge. She had very high standards and her notes were so detailed. It took me several tries to get everything just right. As they talked, Robert began to learn about Grace's life. She told him about growing up poor in rural Georgia, about working multiple jobs to support her children after her husband left, and about the sacrifices she had made to give her kids better opportunities than she had. Robert was struck by Grace's strength and resilience. Here was a woman who had faced tremendous hardships but had never lost her capacity for kindness and care. Your children must be very proud of you, Robert said. It couldn't have been easy raising 3 kids on your own. Grace's eyes lit up with pride. They're all doing well now. My oldest son is a teacher, my daughter is a nurse, and my youngest just graduated from college with a business degree. They worry about me working so far from home, but I wanted to try something new. Besides, I felt called to this job in a way I can't really explain. After dinner, Grace surprised Robert by leading him to the living room, where she had prepared the most touching surprise of all. She had removed the dust cover from Sarah's piano and arranged Sarah's sheet music on the stand. The bench was pulled out, and a single rose from Sarah's garden lay across the keys. Mrs. Sarah was learning to play your wedding song before she got sick, Grace said softly. I found her practice notes and I could see how much she wanted to surprise you by playing it perfectly. I hope you don't mind, but I thought maybe I could play it for you instead. I'm not as good as she was, but I've been practicing. Robert was so moved he could barely speak. The idea that Sarah had been secretly learning their wedding song, planning to surprise him, filled his heart with a bittersweet mixture of love and loss. He nodded for Grace to continue, not trusting his voice. Grace sat down at the piano and began to play The Way You Look Tonight. Her playing was simple and heartfelt, not polished like a professional, but filled with genuine emotion. As the familiar melody filled the room, Robert was transported back to his wedding day 40 years ago. He could see Sarah in her white dress, young and radiant, dancing with him for the first time as his wife, but instead of being overwhelmed by sadness, Robert felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years. He felt grateful. Grateful for the love he and Sarah had shared. Grateful for the 40 years of happiness they had together. Grateful that someone like Grace cared enough to honor Sarah's memory in such a beautiful way. When Grace finished playing, tears were streaming down Robert's face. Thank you, he whispered. That was the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me. Sarah would have loved knowing that her song was played with so much care and love. Grace stood up from the piano bench and handed Robert a tissue. Mr. Matthews, I know I'm just the housekeeper, and maybe I'm overstepping my bounds. But I lost my mama when I was young, and I know what grief can do to a person. Mrs. Sarah wouldn't want you to stop living because she's gone. She'd want you to keep loving, keep caring about people, keep being the good man she fell in love with all those years ago. Robert looked at Grace through his tears and realized that she was absolutely right. Sarah had always been the one who encouraged him to be his best self, who reminded him to be generous and kind to others. In his grief, he had forgotten that the best way to honor Sarah's memory was to continue being the man she had loved. Grace, Robert said, his voice steady for the first time in months, I don't know how to thank you for what you've done. You've given me back my home, my memories, and most importantly, you've reminded me that love doesn't end with death. It continues through the people who care about us. As Robert looked around his transformed house filled with warmth and life and love, he realized that his journey back to living was just beginning. And he couldn't think of anyone he'd rather have guiding him than the remarkable woman who had seen past his grief to the heart that was ready to heal. The weeks following Robert's birthday marked the beginning of a remarkable transformation. For the first time in 3 years, Robert began to truly live in his house instead of just existing there. He started eating breakfast in the sunlit kitchen instead of grabbing coffee and rushing out the door. He spent evenings in the living room, sometimes listening to Grace play piano, sometimes just enjoying the warmth and life she had brought back to his home. Grace settled into a routine that went far beyond typical housekeeping duties. She cooked nutritious meals that Robert actually enjoyed, maintained Sarah's beloved gardens with careful attention to every detail, and gradually helped Robert reconnect with the world outside his grief. She never pushed or pressured him. but her gentle presence encouraged him to engage with life again. Robert began to notice things he had ignored for years. He watched Grace working in Sarah's garden and saw how much joy she found in nurturing the plants Sarah had loved. He observed how she hummed while she cooked, filling the kitchen with the same kind of cheerful energy Sarah used to bring to their home. Most importantly, he saw how Grace treated everyone with dignity and kindness, from Miguel the gardener to the grocery delivery person. One evening, Robert found Grace in the library, carefully cleaning and organizing Sarah's collection of books. She was handling each volume with such care, as if she understood how precious they had been to Sarah. Robert watched her for a moment before speaking. "Sarah spent hours in this room," Robert said, entering the library. "She read everything from classic literature to gardening magazines. She always said that books were her windows to the world." Grace looked up from the book she was dusting, a biography of Eleanor Roosevelt. She had wonderful taste in books. "I've been reading some of them in my free time, and I can see why she loved them so much." "This one about Mrs. Roosevelt is fascinating. She was such a strong woman, just like your Sarah must have been." Robert smiled, realizing that Grace was right. Sarah had been incredibly strong, facing her illness with grace and courage. "She was stronger than I am," Robert admitted. "I don't think I've handled losing her very well." Grace set down the book and looked at Robert with gentle understanding. "Grief isn't something you handle well or poorly, Mr. Matthews. It's something you survive day by day until you learn to carry it without it crushing you. You're doing better than you think." These conversations became a regular part of their evenings. Robert found himself sharing memories of Sarah, stories about their life together, and even his fears about the future. Grace listened without judgment and shared her own experiences with loss and healing. Through these talks, Robert began to understand that grief didn't mean he had to stop caring about other people or stop engaging with life. Grace's influence extended beyond just Robert's personal healing. She encouraged him to reconnect with old friends who had been trying to reach out since Sarah's death. When his brother called, Grace gently insisted that Robert take the call instead of letting it go to voicemail. When neighbors stopped by with invitations or just to check on him, Grace made sure Robert received them warmly instead of hiding away. The biggest change came when Robert decided to host a dinner party for the first time since Sarah's death. It was Grace's idea, suggested so gently that Robert thought it was his own decision. "You know," she said one afternoon while arranging flowers, "Mrs. Sarah's garden is producing so many beautiful vegetables this year. It seems like a shame that only 2 people get to enjoy all this abundance." Robert understood her hint and decided to invite his brother and sister-in-law, along with 2 couples who had been close friends with him and Sarah. The dinner party was scheduled for a Saturday evening in late summer, when Sarah's garden would be at its peak beauty. Grace spent days preparing for the dinner party with the same attention to detail she had shown for Robert's birthday. She planned a menu featuring vegetables and herbs from Sarah's garden, arranged flowers throughout the house, and even convinced Robert to play host with some of his old warmth and charm. The evening of the dinner party, Robert felt nervous but excited. As his guests arrived, he realized how much he had missed having people in his home. His brother couldn't believe the transformation in both Robert and the house. "This place feels alive again," he told Robert quietly. "Sarah would be so happy to see you entertaining again." During dinner, Robert found himself laughing and sharing stories for the first time in years. His guests were delighted to see glimpses of the man they had known before grief changed him. Grace served the meal with quiet efficiency, but Robert made sure to introduce her to everyone and acknowledge how much she had done to make the evening possible. As the guests were leaving, Robert's sister-in-law pulled him aside. "Robert, I don't know what's happened, but you seem like yourself again. That wonderful woman you hired has worked miracles. Sarah would approve of how well she's taking care of you." That night, as Robert and Grace cleaned up after the party, Robert realized that he felt genuinely happy for the first time since Sarah's death. Grace had shown him that honoring Sarah's memory didn't mean preserving everything exactly as it was when she died. It meant continuing to live with the love and warmth that Sarah had brought to their life together. 6 months after Grace first walked into Robert's life, their relationship had evolved into something neither of them had expected. What began as a simple employer-employee arrangement had become a deep friendship built on mutual respect, shared experiences, and genuine care for each other's well-being. Robert had rediscovered his capacity for joy, while Grace had found a sense of purpose and belonging that had been missing from her life. The change in Robert was remarkable to everyone who knew him. He had returned to actively managing his hotels instead of just going through the motions. He was more patient with his employees, more generous in his business dealings, and more engaged with his community. The local newspaper even wrote a feature story about his increased charitable donations and his involvement in community projects. Grace had also blossomed in her role. She had transformed from a housekeeper into a true partner in maintaining the home that both she and Robert loved. She had learned to drive so she could run errands more efficiently, had taken over managing the household finances, and had even started helping Robert with some of his business correspondence. Most importantly, she had brought her own warmth and wisdom to the house while still honoring Sarah's memory. One autumn evening, as Grace was preparing dinner and Robert was reading in the living room, he realized that he felt completely content for the first time in years. The house was filled with the sounds and smells of a home where people cared about each other. Grace was humming in the kitchen, and he could hear Miguel finishing up his work in the garden. Everything felt right in a way that had nothing to do with replacing what he had lost and everything to do with appreciating what he had found. Robert walked into the kitchen and sat down at the table where he and Grace often shared their meals. "Grace," he said, "I need to tell you something important." Grace looked up from the soup she was stirring, concerned by the serious tone in his voice. "What is it, Mr. Matthews? Is everything all right?" "Everything is more than all right," Robert said with a smile. "I've been thinking about how much my life has changed since you came here, and I realize that I've been selfish. You've given me so much, but I haven't thought enough about what you might want for your own future." Grace set down her wooden spoon and gave Robert her full attention. "I'm not sure what you mean. I mean that you're an extraordinary woman who deserves more than just a job as someone's housekeeper. You have so much to offer the world, and I don't want to hold you back from pursuing your own dreams and goals." Grace was quiet for a moment, considering Robert's words. "Mr. Matthews, I appreciate your concern, but I need you to understand something. This isn't just a job for me anymore. This house, this life we've built together, taking care of you and honoring Mrs. Sarah's memory, this is exactly where I want to be. I've never felt more useful or more valued in my entire life." Robert felt a wave of relief wash over him. "I was hoping you might say that, because I have a proposition for you. I don't want you to be just my housekeeper anymore. I want you to be my partner in managing this estate and my businesses. I want to set up a trust fund that will ensure your financial security for the rest of your life, and I want to make sure you have a permanent home here for as long as you want it." Tears began to fill Grace's eyes. "Mr. Matthews, I don't know what to say. That's incredibly generous, but I don't need—" "Please," Robert interrupted gently, "let me do this. You've given me back my life, Grace. You've shown me that love doesn't end with death, it continues through the people who care about us. You've taught me that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning to carry our love forward into new relationships and new experiences." Grace wiped her eyes and smiled through her tears. "You know, when I first took this job, I thought I was just coming here to clean house and earn money. I never imagined that I would find a new family, a new purpose, and a home where I truly belong." Over the following months, Robert kept his promise. He legally established Grace as his estate manager and business partner, giving her authority to make decisions about the house and gardens she loved so much. He set up the trust fund he had promised, ensuring that Grace would never have to worry about financial security again. Most importantly, he made sure Grace understood that she wasn't just an employee. She was family. Grace's children were amazed by the transformation in their mother's life. When they came to visit for Christmas, they were struck by how happy and fulfilled she seemed. Robert welcomed them with the same warmth he would have shown his own family, and Grace's grandchildren quickly adopted him as an honorary grandfather. The house that had been silent for so many years was once again filled with laughter, conversation, and the sounds of a loving family. The local community began to notice the changes as well. Robert and Grace started hosting charity events at the estate, using Sarah's beautiful gardens as the backdrop for fundraising dinners and community gatherings. Grace suggested they start a scholarship fund in Sarah's memory for young women who wanted to pursue careers in gardening or hospitality. Robert loved the idea, and the Sarah Matthews Memorial Scholarship became one of their most successful charitable endeavors. As winter turned to spring, Robert and Grace worked together to plan new additions to Sarah's garden. They decided to create a memorial garden section with a beautiful bench where people could sit and remember loved ones they had lost. The memorial garden became a peaceful place where Robert could feel close to Sarah, while also celebrating the new life and love that Grace had brought to his world. One evening, as they sat together on the new memorial bench watching the sunset over Sarah's roses, Robert reflected on how much his life had changed. "Grace," he said, "I want you to know that Sarah would have loved you. She always believed that love multiplies when it's shared, and you've proven her right. You didn't replace her love, Cass. You helped me understand that there was room in my heart for both the love I'll always carry for her and the gratitude and affection I feel for you." Grace took Robert's hand in hers, a gesture of friendship and mutual care that had become natural between them. "And I want you to know that taking care of you and this beautiful home has healed something in my heart that I didn't even know was broken. We've both learned that family isn't just about blood relations. It's about people who choose to love and care for each other." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Robert felt a deep sense of peace and contentment. Grace had taught him that grief and joy could exist together, that honoring the past didn't mean abandoning the future, and that love really does have the power to heal even the deepest wounds. The wealthy widower who had returned home expecting to find only emptiness had instead discovered that his house was full of life, love, and hope for tomorrow. The story that had begun with devastation had become one of healing, friendship, and the remarkable power of human kindness to transform lives. Robert and Grace had found in each other exactly what they needed: a second chance at family, purpose, and joy.